Hello and welcome to the Sound Architect podcast. Before this episode, I just want to say a quick word from one of our sponsors. This episode was brought to you by RT Sonics, a boutique sound effects library company. RT Sonics' team consists of veteran audio designers with credits that include the Disney Plus and Soul trailers, Facebook, League of Legends, Ratchet & Clank, Mortal Shell, ARK Survival Evolved, Marvel Heroes, Sound Morph, and many others. Their newest sound library, Nuances of Fear, is currently 30% off, and you can get there by using the link in the episode description or via all the links on our website at thesoundarchitect.co.uk. Now for today's episode.
Hi everyone, this is Gareth Coker, and you're listening to the Sound Architect podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Sound Architect podcast. I am your host, Sam Hughes, and today I am joined by Ori and the Will of the Wisps composer, Gareth Coker. Thanks for joining me again today, Gareth. How are you?
I'm doing good, Sam. Just hanging in there with all of this virus craziness and just longing for the time to go out.
Yes.
It is a very weird situation, but I think we're all making the best of it.
Yeah, I think everyone's doing what they can and making the best of it, as you say. So, since the last time we chatted, which was down at Abbey Road a couple of years ago when you were recording the ARK soundtrack,
Yep.
You've been very, very busy, haven't you?
Yes. So about that time, I was finishing off ARK, but also starting to ramp things up on the second Ori game. It's funny, we recorded the ARK score at Abbey Road, but also the week after that, I was recording the E3 trailer for our E3 reveal for Ori 2.
Wow!
So it was a pretty mad time with overlapping projects. Yeah, I worked on finished off ARK, but ARK is this never-ending beast that keeps on churning out new content. So there's been the core game for ARK, which is about 90 minutes of music. Then there's the 3 core expansions, Scorched Earth, Aberration, and Extinction, which have varying amounts of music, but between those 3, it's like another 80 to 90 minutes of music.
Oh wow!
And now they're on. We did ARK Genesis Part 1 in February, and ARK Genesis Part 2 is coming. At some point, I can't really say when, but it's kind of one of those. It'll
At
be ready
some
when
point
it's ready.
in the future.
Yes, at some point in the future. Probably not too long. I feel like they're good for an expansion a year. So ARK is this kind of gift that keeps on giving, and I keep getting to explore. And what they did in ARK Genesis Part 1, I feel like it was like almost like everything the game. It was all of the things you never knew you needed put into one game, and it's still in the top 10 on Steam charts, like in terms of the number of people playing it. So clearly they've got lightning in a bottle, for which I'm very grateful, because they keep asking me back to work on it. But alongside ARK and the constant need for new music, I have been working on Ori and the Will of the Wisps, and also in that time, and actually before Ori and the Will of the Wisps came out, because Ori 2 was delayed several times, I also worked on Darksiders Genesis, which was about 90 to 100 minutes of music as well, in a style that is pretty much the opposite of Ori. So it's been kind of like fun to play one project off the other, so I didn't go too insane just working on one thing for like 2 years or another thing for 2 years. I kind of like playing the projects off each other.
Yeah, definitely. I was going to say, because the amount of minutes that you kept listing there, all I could think was, but when do you sleep? So, speaking of being very busy, how do you handle workload, and how do you know when enough's enough?
I think one of the things, I mean, you've got to be a good time manager to work in this industry, but especially if you're an independent contractor, which the vast majority of composers are. Most of us are not working in-house.
Yeah.
And so you've got to have the discipline to be able to work from home and get the work done, which I know a lot of people who are at home because they have to be right now, are probably struggling with to adapt to the change in lifestyle, because I think some people do fundamentally need to go to work to be at their maximum efficiency.
Oh yeah.
It's quite, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. In fact, it has a lot of benefits. Some people are just built a certain way to work in an office environment, but me personally, I love staying at home, and I've been able to cultivate a habit, and it is a habit. Cultivate a habit of getting things done, learning when I'm most efficient, learning when I'm not efficient, and then not trying to fight it. For example, I don't really do any creative work in the afternoon because I live in California, and pretty much every day in California is bright and sunny.
Of course.
And frankly, who wants to do any work in like the beautiful sunshine? It's literally called the Sunshine State. When I look outside and see endless blue sky, so my most efficient times are usually from like 6 a.m. to like midday, and then 6 p.m. until midnight. And I'll often take a nap in the afternoon. I guess my lifestyle is very Spanish. I found that has that like doing nothing. It's not even doing nothing. It's just turning off the creative side of the brain. So I can still do emails and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I absolutely won't do anything creative in the afternoon unless like it's very urgent or an urgent client request. Since I learned to stop fighting the need to like work all the time or like force creativity, I actually found I've been more creative. I think it's more about when you have this much work to do, it's about working smartly and efficiently and not being scared to say, no, I can't do this right now because I'm not feeling inspired or just the idea isn't very good. And if the idea isn't very good, it's just like, well, just step away and do something else. Because it'll probably like I've learned that, I think I can write some half decent music. So I feel like it will come eventually. And so I think if you force it, then you just end up putting more pressure on yourself. So I would like to say, even though it does seem like a lot of minutes and like when do I sleep, I actually have not pulled an all-night. I did pull one all-nighter for Ori 2. But generally speaking, I don't do that anymore. I'd rather, because also if you pull an all-nighter, you'd lose basically the next 2 days.
Yeah, exactly. You make up for that time.
Yeah, you pay for it.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'd rather pay for it like at the very end of production when there's nothing due the next day.
When you can take the next couple of days off.
Yes, exactly. But like in the middle, no, it's just like I just don't fight it. And honestly, if I think the other thing is to not be afraid to request a little more time from the client. There's generally when the hard deadline is, and there's also like soft deadlines built into that. And I think most good employers know to build a little bit of contingency and leeway in terms of the delivery dates, because we're not machines. Much as we would like to be machines, we're not. It's I've been very fortunate to have clients that are super super flexible, and I'm glad I've been able to like find a workflow that works for me and that makes me more efficient. I think the other important thing is staying fit and healthy. It is much easier to be ready to work if you're physically fit, you're mentally fit, because that requires like a level of discipline. And I think like getting into that habit can have like so many other benefits as well. So in that respect, if you are a freelancer and you're feeling like there's too much work to do, just like maybe just get out and do something else, and also make sure you're doing as much as you can to like stay fit and healthy, and then diet's a big part of that as well, because I feel like even though the fitness takes time, like it takes like an hour or two out of my day, I feel like I'm more efficient after it. So it was actually worth it.
Yeah,
rather than
it makes a big difference.
Sitting on my butt in front of the computer for hours and hours and hours on the end, waiting for inspiration to strike. Unfortunately, it doesn't work like that.
But it does, right? It's like lightning. You sit there, do nothing, and then it just happens. That's how it works. No,
it does. Well, it does and it doesn't. But like it's the waiting for it to happen. That's the thing that needs to be avoided. You need to like. I feel like if you wait for it to happen, then it never does.
No, of course.
So yeah, it's managing the workload is really just because ultimately, yes, we are composers and artists, but you're ultimately running a business, and you have to deliver on time, and you have to deliver on budget. And if you do those things, you're probably going to get rehired if the work was adequate, because it is hard to deliver on time and on budget, especially when you're doing hundreds of queues and delivering loops and stems and all of the rest of it. It's not easy what we do. So you just have to create a habit and a workflow that works for you, that ensures you get enough sleep, that ensures you stay healthy, and keeps you in a mindset that you can get the work done, even if you're not like 100% inspired, but you can still do something good when you're like 90% inspired.
Yeah. But it must be a combination of things, right? Including experience and trust to know when you can do these things. Because I know when you start out, and someone says, "Oh, hey, can you deliver this amount of stuff by this date?" When you first start out, you're kind of like, I don't know, just yeah, probably, yeah, okay, yeah, I can do that.
Yeah, you're like, yeah. Usually when you're starting out, you're just happy to have the gigs. You're like, yeah, no problem. And then you get off the phone and you're like, oh my god, what did I just agree to? But then you have to do it because you said yes.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like no matter what you agree to, you have to find a way, even if it means hiring something with someone else, or like just getting help or whatever. I think that's the other thing. I am less proud than I used to be. On Ori and the Blind Forest, I did everything. I did the orchestration, I did the notation, and that was like 100 minutes of music, and I'd never done that before, and it was the stupidest thing I've ever done. Prepping the stems, prepping the Pro Tools sessions for recording, and it's just too much. And if I had done that, or if I'd even tried to do that on Will of the Wisps, the score would not exist. The score would not exist without my orchestrators.
I don't think Gareth would exist either.
No, that's true. There were a lot of people that needed to be employed to make the soundtrack happen. And I think, composers often get put on this magical pedestal, and we're often seen by our fans. And it is kind of cool that we're seen by our fans as these mythical figures that output music, but the amount of people required in order for us to be able to output the music, it really does take a village to get the stuff done.
Oh yeah.
And if you don't, especially when timeframes are condensed, obviously you can do it all yourself if you have 3 to 4 years, but when you have 3 to 4 years and there's an orchestral recording at the end of it, there is just a massive crunch of work that needs to happen in the final 2 to 3 weeks, because it's not usually until then that things get the final sign off. And we actually had 2 recordings for Will of the Wisp because we hadn't finished the cutscenes by December. So we had 1 recording in December, and then I came back in January to do the cutscenes and the end of the game, because we were still locking them.
Yeah. Because
that is the nature of game development. You can make changes until the very end, as I'm sure you know.
Oh, I'm mildly aware, yeah.
And often those changes are actually really valuable, because often you only see the full picture quite near the end of production, and the errors become more obvious because you finally get to see the art, the fully mocked up music and the sound, and everything's working together. And then it becomes immediately obvious what's not working. And then you're like, oh my God, now we have to change that. But it'll be a good change because it so clearly needs to be changed. Whereas in the earlier parts of game development, almost anything can work, in a vacuum. But then when you put it all together and make the game become a real thing, then it's well, how do all of these individual components fit together? And you often don't see that, especially in a Metroidvania, quite near the end. And with Control, given that you've worked on Control, and I love that game, Control is basically a Metroidvania. At least it has facets of the Metroidvania design. You cannot reach certain areas until you have a certain ability. Jedi Fallen Order is another example of a game, a AAA game that is taking the Metroidvania concept and putting it into its design. There are things that you can change, and then it has knock-on effects to the design of the rest of the world. And in a game like Ori, which is so dependent on flow and movement and platforming, the changes can be very, very far-reaching. So you have to be super reactive at the end. So my job right at the end is just compose, and I would hand stuff off as it was approved to my orchestrators to get it ready for the session. It definitely takes a village to get stuff done, and I'm not afraid anymore to call in help. There isn't a composer doing orchestral music these days that is doing literally everything by themselves. There is usually a helping hand or two to get the project over the line.
Yeah.
Even John Williams uses orchestrators. Like, there's no shame in it. It's necessary because of like the crazy deadlines we're under.
Yeah, I don't see why anyone would ever see any shame in it anyway. It's almost kind of ridiculous that someone would be like, oh no, you should do it all by yourself.
I think there are some people who think like if you use an orchestra, therefore you're a classical composer. And if you think back to the days of Batesart and
Mohoven.
Batesart and Mothoven, yes. Beethoven and Mozart, they probably were doing it all themselves. Although I have a theory that because Mozart wrote so much music, he was like actually the first music factory, and just his name ended up on all of the scores. Because I don't know how it's physically possible for someone to write all that music, especially when it was done by hand. I just don't understand. Yes, I know he was a genius.
There's a lot of orchestrators just buried in the cellar that never made it to the light.
Right, exactly. I think he was the first like music factory, but we'll never truly know. Yeah, it was actually really fun because most of the people, in fact, all of the people who I work with, I've generally known for a very long time, and it's kind of cool to be able to bring them onto a project. So we're all getting to travel together and enjoy the experience together, and it makes the end result more fun. I mean, my conductor Alex, we have been working together for 10 years.
Wow.
My main orchestrator Zach, we have been working together for 10 years, and we've kind of gone from being students together to now, I'm going to be honest, we're traveling the world recording music. I mean, it is literally the dream.
That does sound pretty amazing to me, yeah.
Right, exactly. I mean, going to obviously, Alex and I are from England, so going to London itself isn't, a huge deal, but going to Abbey Road was a huge deal. Recording at Air Lyndhurst was a huge deal. But for the Americans, obviously for Zach, I mean, Zach had only been to England once before, and he actually wasn't there to spend any time in London, so it was all new for him. So yeah, it's just kind of cool to be able to enjoy the journey together. It was the same with Nashville. None of us had been to Nashville when we recorded all the Minecraft stuff.
That must have been amazing.
Yep, exactly. It's just like a completely new city, and when you're sharing it with your friends, it makes the music making process a lot more comfortable. And I've also found that the orchestras that we've worked with can sense the camaraderie between our team, and I feel
of course,
like
and the chemistry, surely.
Yeah, the chemistry in it. I feel like we get more from them as a result. They're obviously going to be super professional, no matter who is in front of them. But I think when they see that, they feel it, and they're like the general feeling is like, oh, today is going to be a fun day recording, even no matter what is on the page, no matter how difficult or how easy it is. They're like, today is going to be a fun day, because there are probably some sessions which they do which are very, very difficult or very taxing and demanding, and when you have a team that has been together as long as Alex, Zach, and myself have, it does make things a lot easier.
Yeah, so if I can ask, are you all individuals in terms of the way you work together? You're not under one kind of umbrella or anything?
Nope.
You all work separately as freelancers? And
yeah, we're all freelancers. I mean, Zach and Alex are amazing composers in their own right. They do a ton of production music. That is kind of like their thing. But Zach can orchestrate, Alex can orchestrate, they can both conduct, I could orchestrate for them. We kind of are available to each other, and we just kind of clicked when we were studying at the University of Southern California together. We just kind of grouped up, and it hasn't really broken up ever since. So yeah, we're all just operating independently, and basically everyone is just a phone call away, and we generally are able to make time for each other as and when we need it.
That's awesome. So what would you say is the kind of minimum team you would need if you have to score an orchestral soundtrack?
Yeah, it does depend on how long you have on the project, what the time schedules are, like how much time, how much music you have to record, how much time you have to write the music, and generally what are the project's deliverables, and how is that syncing up with the game's overall schedule. With Ori, it was just like, how late can we leave it? like, what is the latest possible date that we can record, which is why we split things up into two, because I knew we weren't going to leave absolutely everything up until the last minute.
Yeah, of course.
But I was like, I don't want the pressure of having to only have like one recording date and then that's it, which is why we split it up into two, because there was content that had been in the game for a long time and that was working for everybody. So I was like, no one's asked for any changes for this for like a year, so it's clearly working. We can record it. Like, yeah, that's the kind of process. But then, you might record something and then be like, oh, it doesn't work as well as I thought it would. And that actually was the greatest benefit of having that second recording session, because there are actually a couple of cues which I revisited as a result of having recorded them, but not having time to rewrite them while I was there. And I was like, oh man, I'm so glad we have the second recording, because it's only like a 45-second cue, but I've been able to rewrite it and actually make it better. And we had a second date where we could get everything done.
That's so good.
So it's very luxurious. Like, I was fortunately very well supported on this project, but like, it's luxurious to have two split dates. But I think in future now I might like suggest it to clients, because it's like, you may not want to have all of that pressure, especially on a project with this much music. I mean, the soundtrack is 3 hours long. When there's that much music to get done, relying on it to all be perfect after a week of recording, yes, it can be done, absolutely, but why not leave a contingency? So I think I might be suggesting that from now on, because it worked a treat on Ori 2.
Yeah, well, it sounds like it worked great. And speaking of Ori 2, I have held on long enough. I have to talk about it. I want to talk about Ori and the Will of the Wisps. So I assume it all started with Moon Studios being like, okay, that was awesome. We're making another one and we want you back.
Yeah, there was it was probably one of the easiest contracts I've had to sign ever. So I mean, frankly, to get to play in that world one time is a dream for any composer. To get to do it again is unbelievable, because the project, I don't think there's a composer alive who wouldn't want to do a game like Ori, especially in a game with minimal dialogue and when music does do a lot of the heavy lifting. So it's both a creative challenge but also a creative playground. So I was very fortunate that I was able to get brought on early. The process was much the same as Blind Forest. Get brought on early, learn the game, see the art from a concept stage. So when it came down to pressing the accelerate button in most of 2019, I knew exactly what I was going to do, because I'd spent so much time with the game and knew the ins and outs of it. There were some nice technical things that we were able to do this time around that we weren't able to do on the first game. If you recall, the first game did not use any audio middleware, no Fmod, no Wise. It was the stock Unity audio playback.
Yeah.
And it's still kind of amazing that we shipped a game with very decent sounding audio, using stock audio, stock Unity playback. But we were able to utilize Wise this time. I was able to. I again, speaking of living the dream, I do the music implementation up until it requires coding or setup in Wise. So
yeah.
What I mean by that is I'll type up a PDF and I'll record a video with captions showing what track is playing when, and between that video and PDF, I hand it off to the person doing the music implementation for me, so that there can be no question what should be happening when. So it results in a ton of videos being made, but I'm constantly playing the game anyway and recording everything. So it's actually not really a problem. And most composers have beastly computers, so it actually just doesn't take much time to render anything at all. So I passed it off, and I was very, very lucky to be working with Guy Whitmore on this. Guy Whitmore is a game audio legend. I don't think
very much so.
I mean, he is what he has forgotten more about implementation than most people will ever know.
That's a fair statement.
Like he is so good at implementation, but because he's also a composer, he understands like what my goal is. There are all sorts of I always get into this debate with people about music implementation, because you can have an incredibly complicated system, but is it actually necessary for your game? And I feel like one mistake that quite a few developers make is thinking about the system before they actually have the music, or before they like actually think how the music will work in the game. Like, here is the system, but you actually don't know what the system is until like you have like a couple of tracks. I remember on Ori 1, we experimented with vertical layering for combat music, and it just absolutely sucked because you're in and out of combat so quickly. Whereas I'm going to compare it to Control, just because I played the crap out of the game.
I haven't paid you, by the way, Gareth. I'm not paying
no, I know,
you.
but
Genuinely
like
likes Control.
but it's a really great game. But Control has clear start and end points for its combat, so it makes sense to have like a combat layer. I don't know if it's layered or if it's an actual queue. It doesn't really matter. But there is a clear delineation between combat starting and combat ending because it's supported by the visuals and the gameplay. Whereas Ori, it's way more organic. You are in and out of gameplay, in and out of combat, left, right, and center. Whereas Control is much more defined. I feel like you hear the stinger at the end, but there's like literally no more enemies to kill. So whatever system is in play in Control absolutely works for the gameplay and the visuals, and that's what I'm all about. Is like, honestly, you're in and out of combat so quickly. To add percussion or a combat layer would actually make it less immersive because it starts to feel gimmicky if you're in and out of combat music so quickly.
Yeah.
What I like the music to do is, define situations very, very clearly. So we only have combat music when you have to kill something to progress, or you might get locked in and gated in and you have to kill the 2 monsters to unlock the gates. Like, that is a clear place where there is a clear start and a clear stop point for combat music to come in and out. So I'm like constantly looking for those I just like to call them switches. I'm looking for those switches all over every game that I'm working on, because then it allows for a smooth transition. The other thing about, combat music is like the sound effects are part of the combat music to me. It's like if the sound effects are doing enough to communicate to the player that you're in combat, you often don't need like the extra combat music because sound effects in games are usually pretty beefy.
Yeah, the combat's pretty much in your face a lot of the time.
Yeah, exactly. So, and it's the same in Ori. So I'm just like, great, I'm going to let the combat do its thing and we'll just have the music continue to play in the background. And the benefit of that is when we do need to dial things up for actual combat scenes where you have to kill something, we have room to grow. And then when you have a boss fight, you have room to grow even further. So that actually, it makes the score, in my opinion, end up being more dynamic.
Well, you don't box yourself in then, do you?
Yes, exactly.
You give yourself room to breathe and you don't have that expectation of there's combat, therefore I have to have combat music.
Yeah, and that's a trap that can fall into. It was actually in parallel. I was working on Darksiders Genesis, and originally they were like, yeah, we want combat music. We want like 3 different combat music like layers. And I'm like, nah, you definitely don't want that. because I played the game and I was like, okay, there's boss fights and then there's combat. And that's pretty much it. Because the game is, you're riding around on a horse with guns killing demons. So I'm just like, let's not make it any more complicated than this. The plan was originally to have like however many number of enemies there were on screen, like dictate how big the music got, which is a nice idea in theory, but then you're just like dealing with ever-changing parameters, and I'm just like, well, what if you just have really cool combat track and a really cool ambient track and make sure that they can change on the fly? Like, sometimes less is more. There are games where like changing stuff vertically on a very, very granular basis does really work. I've always thought racing games would benefit from this approach so much because it's so friggin' simple. The faster you go, the more intense the music gets. It's not complicated. I've always felt racing games would benefit from a music setup like that. But then to turn that on its head, Forza Horizon just has the radio and it has just like amazing tracks, and that also works. Like, so there's multiple ways to do these things. It's all about finding the best system for your game, and I feel like it's essential. If there is like a large audio team, like get the composer's opinion on what that system should be. The composer's opinion isn't gospel, but they will likely have some valuable input, especially if they are gamers and they want to play the game as much as possible while they're working on it. With Moon Studios and Will of the Wisps, it's pretty much a job requirement that I play the game, and they feel. They are of the opinion, how can I possibly do my job to the best of my ability if I am not playing the game? And I agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that fully, because if you don't even know the product you're writing music for, I mean, even Even if you just watch videos, it's not the same, is it?
Nope. I think the days, especially, it's one thing if it's like a multiplayer shooter or something like that, where it's just kind of a track that maybe isn't that dynamic. But I think in a narrative game, a game where you're trying to tell a story, if you're not experiencing that story with the controller in your hand, and that does make a difference to perception.
It really does.
If you're not doing that yourself, because by moving the character right and left yourself, you are instantly becoming more connected to that character. It's quite fascinating. There's probably a giant PhD thesis being written on like what it means to connect through a controller. And if it's not being written, someone should write it. To me, I feel like I think the days of getting a bit of concept art and maybe a couple of levels, I think those days are gone. And if not, they will be going soon, because there are lots of composers like me who feel that this is like super important to play the games that they're working on. And I'm not saying you should be dedicating like hundreds and hundreds of hours, because obviously it is, you've got to do the work. But like the key bits, you definitely need to be playing like in an open world game, because I know what's going to come back at me. Like if someone was listening to this was like, well, how would you do that in an open world game? And I'm like, well, every open world game has like landmark events and like and like moments. You need to find the moments that you want to score within the open world game and make them meaningful, because not every moment in a open world game like is going to be meaningful, but like generally there are landmarks, there are events within the story. Those are the things you want to highlight, and you need to experience them for yourself,
of course,
rather than just through a video. I mean, I'm working on an open world game now for a separate client, and they gave me like full access to the game, and they were just like, yeah, have at it, just dive into the latest build and move around all of the different environments. And it's just like, it's great to be able to see and understand like what they're trying to do with the world. And that game just has landmarks, so we have a musical stinger when you approach the landmark, and it's really cool. But then a lot of the times it's just it's just ambient music, because that's all that's required. But I think the more the composer plays the game, the better a job they can do. It is possible to deliver a great soundtrack without playing the game, but I feel like in those scenarios, there is an amazing audio team that is taking that composer's music, understanding what it's trying to do, and then implementing it into the game. But the fact is that the vast majority of composers will not have that until they're working on a AAA project.
Yeah, that's true. And it feeds into what you were saying before, because when you understand the connection with the player, and then you understand the meaning of these moments, it also feeds into what you were saying before about dynamic range and having the headroom to make these moments key moments with music.
Yep. It was so with Ori 2, I really loved what we did with the boss fights. But even within the boss fights are kind of like this multi-event thing. So a lot of games have boss fight music, and it's just like one epic track, and that actually can work totally fine. There's countless examples where it works great. But with Ori being like such a narratively driven game, I was like, can we tell a story within the boss fight? And I'm like, well, and so I'm like, well, is there a story to be told in the boss fight? That's the first question I'm looking at trying to answer. I'm going to take the spider fight as an example. At the beginning, the spider emerges from a cocoon and then just like basically jumps down on Ori, and the ground breaks and Ori falls. And I'm like, well, there's an intro. So we have like the terrifying intro. The first phase of combat, you generally are trying to get a feel for what the spider is doing. And I'm like, well, this is where we kind of like sell the terrifying aspects of the combat and the boss fight with the spider. But then when you get the spider down to 50% HP, a transition kicks off not just in the music but also in the gameplay. You move to a different arena, and I'm like, oh great, there's one of those switches that I'm talking about. We're moving to a different arena in the game. That means I now have an excuse to change the music, because I always feel like a change in visuals or a change in event supports a change in the music.
Yeah, of course.
And I'm like, well, the spider's down to 50%. We can now move from the terrifying music and make the music more optimistic in feel, in order to tell the player, yes, you're winning. You actually can do this. And it is unbelievably gratifying, and I do feel slightly smug that people that people picked up on this and have commented on YouTube. Oh yeah, the shift in the music to the optimistic music that is a callback to some of the optimistic music in Blind Forest. It made me want to keep going and defeat the spider. And what I'm doing is I'm not reinventing the wheel here, but it is about the execution of a very simple concept of transitioning music horizontally, timed to what is going on in the game. The main difference, and this gets back to the middleware, because we couldn't have done anything like this with the stock Unity engine. Well, we could have, but it would
have been an audio coder's nightmare, I imagine.
Yes, but all it was is just simply the music being tied to certain game states, like Spider is down to 50% HP. That wiring has to be done somewhere in the game, and then the music just changes on the beat. And I'm just like, wow, this is so simple, but it's all about the execution and how it ties to what is going on in the gameplay. And that kind of more granular changing is one of the newer signatures in Will of the Wisp. We did do those kind of switches in Blind Forest, but we did not have the tech to do them as often as possible. I'm going to give another simple example, which I have given elsewhere, but it's a really good example, and it's quite a fun area of the game. There is a small puzzle room in the watermill in Will of the Wisps, and it's basically just a platforming room. And when you get to the end of the room, you have to pull a lever, and then the room rotates 90 degrees. It's the same environment, but all of the platforms have rotated 90 degrees. And then you have to find your way. You have to find your way to the next lever. You'll probably appreciate this because Control kind of does that.
It is sounding a bit familiar. Continue. Yeah.
Yes, I could say we did start designing it before Control came out, but it's kind of. I always enjoy like environmental puzzles, but every time you pull the lever, you get a new arrangement of the same piece of music, just played with a few more instruments. The pitch is slightly higher and the tempo is slightly increased. It's important to point out that this is not like a cheap trick using a plugin to raise the pitch and speed up the tempo. It is a new recording, a new piece of music, or a new arrangement of the same piece of music. And it's like one of those little subconscious things. It's only like 70 seconds. It's not like a huge composition. So actually this one puzzle room, you pull the lever 3 times, so you're going to hear 3 different pieces of music, and you pull it for the last time, and then the you've completed the puzzle room music plays. So actually one puzzle room has 4 different cues that will play during it. Is that excessive? Would one piece of puzzle music have been enough? Yeah, probably. But I feel like that level of detail is now required in video games. Like video game audio and soundtracks, gamers are picking up on these small things now, and I think we are generally being held to higher standards. I don't think audio is anymore the lost child of game development. I think good game audio now is really felt by the players, as opposed and it is a big consideration for them, as opposed to being an afterthought. So all of these little details, it might seem excessive, but for someone who gets stuck in the puzzle room, or maybe can't execute the platforming as well, because some people fly through it.
Yeah.
But for someone who gets stuck, they're going to get a sense of reward and progression when they pull that lever for the first time and the music changes.
Yeah, definitely.
It is a subtle change, but it is a change, and those kind of granular changes, because it's happening on a Switch, you can speed run through it and it's going to work fine, or you can be struggling on it and you still pull the lever and the music changes in the same way. It's going to be the same musical development that's tied with the narrative. It just happens with a slightly different time frame. And it's just those kind of switches that are all over the game that I spend just a lot of time looking for. And of course, there is a balance to be had, because if you do that too often, then you don't give the player a chance to appreciate a piece of music. So it's just like, when do you let things breathe and stretch it out? And when do you it would be fun to do a lot of changes in the music here. And I don't think you can do that without playing the game a ton. And those teams that are editing music for composers who aren't playing the game, they are playing the game a ton and figuring all of these questions out.
Yeah. And I think what you say about balance there is right as well, because you don't want it to become too kitschy or gimmicky either.
Nope.
Where the player's like, yeah, all right, we get it. Yeah,
yeah, I mean, it's the only room where I do that, because it's actually the only room in the gameplay where it warrants it. It's the only room which has a rotating environment. So why not do something special there? It helps make the moment helps make the area more special and memorable to the player, in my opinion. So it's a small thing, and maybe some people didn't notice it, and that's fine. But I think maybe whilst they will now, it's one of those things that might be felt rather than slapping you over the head with like, here is the big music change. That's not really the goal. It's more like just subtle development and shifting in the music throughout. A game that I've played recently, which I don't know the system behind it, but I sensed something was going on, is Plague's Tale Innocence, which Olivier de Rivière did.
Oh, yeah, I've been meaning to play that, yeah.
Now, it's a very linear game, and that's not a criticism, it is what it is. But what he is doing with the music, at least what I am, when I look at it and like try to analyze what's going on without knowing what's going on under the hood, it seems like the music changes very, very granularly with exactly what's going on in the gameplay. But again, it's actually a very simple concept. Change the music according to a game state, like player triggers an animation or something and the music changes. But he's done it in such a granular way that it feels like it's constantly changing throughout. And I'm sure I'm not doing it justice describing it like this, but that's just what it felt like. And it was just really cool to see music change in a granular way. But I think it actually is just a very simple concept executed to the very, very highest level.
Amazing. Yeah, I'll have to check that one out.
It's a fantastic game. I mean, if you don't have time to play the whole game, just play like the opening chapter. The opening chapter in particular is masterful. Like in terms of just setting the scene and drama, it is one of the finest like opening chapters I've played of a game of recent years.
Wow, that's definitely a high recommendation there. I'm gonna have to check it out.
Yep.
So with Ori and the Will of the Wisps, it must have been amazing to return to such a familiar world, and as you've just told me, with all this kind of room to explore more.
Yep.
In terms of not only technical capabilities, but in terms of the world itself.
Yep.
So what was the kind of like biggest opportunity for you, if you haven't said it already?
First of all, the addition of new characters allowed me to write more thematic material. And they're all secondary themes because Ori's theme is king, and it's a game about Ori.
Of course.
But we have Ku, the baby owl. She has her own theme. We have Quolok, the big toad. He has his own theme. Shriek is the main antagonist. She has her own theme. Mora the spider. While you're in her level and area, she has her own theme. And the spider boss music takes the melody that plays while you're going through the environment and like does the boss music version of that melody. So it's just kind of cool to like have all of these different characters that I could work with. There's one cue on the soundtrack called Ash and Bone, which takes place during a sequence in the Silent Woodlands where Shriek, the antagonist, is stalking Ori and Ku at the same time. And it was an opportunity. I was like, yes, I get to combine Ori's theme, Ku's theme, and Shriek's theme into one cue, and hopefully it won't suck. So
it's the goal, right? You hope that nothing sucks.
Right, exactly. But those opportunities don't come around very often because we don't, we're spending so much time with Ori. But this was cool because like Shriek is in the background and Ku and Ori and Ku are exploring the environment together. So I was like, there is absolutely no way I cannot use all three melodies here at some point during the queue. So that was kind of fun to explore. I think the other obvious thing to say is that the game is bigger than Ori and the Blind Forest, which means there are more environments, which means that's a greater array of instruments and palettes for me to explore. If you compare the spider area, which is the Moldwood Forest, on the soundtrack it's called Shadows of Moldwood, if you compare that with the Luma Pools, I mean, they could not be more different. Luma Pools is this bright and vibrant area. I'm edging into jazz harmony at the beginning of Luma Pools.
Nice.
Because it's so wildly different. But Shadows of Moldwood is basically about as dissonant as Ori has ever been. It's not dissonant in terms of like screechy strings. It's dissonant in terms of the fact that there's dissonant is the wrong word. Aleatoric is the better word to describe it. It's aleatoric but tonal. So there is a random element to what the strings are playing, but it is still tonal because I don't think dissonance and atonality fits very well in the Ori world. But I was like, how can we make this environment the most unsettling place that has ever been in an Ori game without resorting to typical horror music tropes?
And again, it's those subtle moments where the player feels uncomfortable, even if they're not 100% sure why.
Yep, exactly. And we just created all of these different string textures, which were constantly moving and evolving, but they were still tonal. So they weren't like, they were uncomfortable to listen to, but they still fit with all of the harmony and melody and the music. And I was just like, this is a really interesting combo, and it's probably something I'm gonna explore further in future projects if the project warrants it, because there's a lot of dissonance and atonality in games and aleatoric music, but I don't think there's that many games that are doing the tonal aleatoric thing that much. So I'm gonna keep exploring that.
Oh, that sounds exciting. I can almost hear you rubbing your palms together.
Yes, that is exactly. I mean, I will say that actually, as part of the scoring process for this, I did actually record a library of sounds that were entirely these tonal like textures, which did just move like kind of randomly in an unsettling way. So the project kind of already has begun.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Yes. So yeah, it was just fun being able to explore like all of these different sounds and just like explore all the different palettes. And that's testament to the art team as well, because they gave me so much to work with. Like, all of the environments look so different from each other. I'm doing them a disservice by not making the music sound different as well. But of course, the key is like combining all of these different palettes, making sure it sounds like it's part of the same score, rather than just having like, here's one random piece of music that has like completely unique instrumentation. Here's another one that has random unique instrumentation. Then how do you get it to be part of the same score? And that's where the orchestra comes in, because it's kind of the glue that holds everything together.
Yeah, of course.
And then you got to combine it with the character themes, and then also tell the story. So it's just a bigger world, more characters, more places. Just the scope in general of the game is much larger. And then when you combine that with all of the technical aspects that I was mentioning earlier, it just meant a lot more music needed to be written. And that's why the soundtrack ends up being 180 minutes long. And people ask, why do you need an 180 minutes long soundtrack? And I'm like, well, all of that music that is on the soundtrack, every single player, that is very indicative of the narrative experience that the player, of all the music that the player will hear in a complete playthrough of Ori. And I made cuts to that, because there is some optional content in the game.
Oh, man.
I made cuts. So there is actually more music than that, but it isn't directly part of the narrative. So but that 180-minute runtime is something that every single player will experience while they are going through the world of Ori. So I'm like, well, that's what's going to get put on the soundtrack.
Nice. And I have to ask, like, with everything you did on Ori and the Blind Forest, obviously you were kind of fresh to that project at the time. What lessons and experiences did you kind of learn and gain from Ori and the Blind Forest that prepared you for Ori and the Will of the Wisps? And what did you use? What did you carry over that you were like, okay, right, now I remember this from last time, I'm not going to do the same mistake, or I remember this from last time, this worked, that didn't, I'm going to do this?
I think I almost doubled down on the lack of percussion. There generally was not much percussion in Blind Forest, and that was something that worked so unbelievably well for the final audio mix. So I was like, let's stay the hell away from anything that's transient heavy, let alone percussion. Let's just stay away from anything that's transient heavy. So that just gives the sound effects so much space. Even the percussion we do have, there's none of that clicky stuff. And you know exactly of what I speak. And some games it works really great, but it's like that's not clicky is not an Ori sound. There's a lot of pulsing and there's a lot of movement in the music, but it's almost like all of the transients are being rolled off. So you kind of like have this gentle like humming pulsing as opposed to clicking pulsing. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think I know what you're saying.
That was one thing I definitely developed from Blind Forest and just kind of doubled down on. I think the other thing is there's this whole thing in game music like don't repeat. And I'm like, well, actually do repeat if the idea is good. Now, what determines if an idea is good? I don't know, because it's different from one person to the next. But this is why we test our games. And if I think that a melody is strong, I'm going to play it twice in a 3 to 4 minute loop. And if it becomes too repetitive or jarring, the team is going to tell me. And I try to get the music in as often as early as I can, so that the team has time to spend with it. And if I don't hear anything back, I'll assume that nothing is wrong, because between the team got to like 60 people, and if someone said something, it's 60 people from all over the world. If someone doesn't like it, they're gonna speak up.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But if nothing gets said, then I'm like, well, we've got people from all over the world, and there seems to be a consensus here. We're probably okay. So I actually think it's okay to repeat ideas as long as the idea is palatable and not hammering you in the face. I think one of the and that's another thing about combat music is if you have like those same motifs with music that's set to like level, set to a really high level, it can become a bit tiring after a while. Unless that's your goal, to exhaust the player, which it definitely isn't in Ori. You don't really want to hear the same riff hitting you over the head, but most of the melodies in Ori are supportive and they're not like hitting you in the face, so it's okay to repeat them or just vary them in a slightly different way. So I think that's one thing. I'm not afraid to use repetition if the idea is feeling good, because if it's feeling good, you can do it again and the player will want to hear it again, and it helps them stay in the world. Yeah, I mean, the other thing, which I've kind of touched upon already, is the team aspect, being afraid to delegate. That's just something because it didn't happen on the first project, and it's something I definitely appreciated this time around.
Yeah, you like sleeping, don't you, Gareth?
Yes, exactly.
I find it funny that the repetition side of things, people are like, oh, don't repeat. When, in the history of gaming, of course, it was because of the technical restrictions, but a lot of game music repeated a lot. And in the early days, yes, it was really repetitive, but there was a middle ground where things would repeat in a certain way or ideas would repeat, and it became some of the most iconic music we ever listened to. So repetition isn't always a bad thing. It just depends how you do it, right?
Yep, it's all about execution, rather than the idea itself. Is how well you execute the idea. I mean, I read on some forum recently that, and I know I shouldn't read the forum comments, but I can't resist. And it was like, why did he reuse the melody for the chase music? And I'm like, because I literally did that in every chase music for the first game, and it's kind of like that is part of the identity of the game. It would be like, Star Wars not using a one of the riffs for like, the Luke Skywalker moment, or the whenever Darth Vader's on screen you hear the Imperial March. You just like, there's just certain things a sequel has to do to honor the original material, of course, in my opinion, because here's the thing, you're kind of damned if you do. It's the thing, you can't please everyone. And it's just like, of actually the entire score, the original Ori theme is actually not played very, very much. It's just played when it matters. And those chase scenes, it matters. The boss fights, it matters. But actually for a lot of the music in the game, you don't hear Ori's theme very much because you're meeting other characters on the way. So, that's... I think repetition of theme and consistency of theme is what helps you build an identity for a game. And if there's one thing I've learned in game audio, is that pretty much every game director wants their game to have an identity. And that doesn't just mean visuals; it's audio identity as well. Control has an audio identity, but so many great games do. I mean, Halo has an audio identity, just with the monks from the opening menu. Yeah. Hellblade has a very unique audio identity, even though it's a mostly ambient soundtrack. The way the Foley and the voice is handled is incredibly unique. It has an identity. Inside, an incredibly ambient soundtrack and with a very unique approach to sound design, it still has an identity. I know what it sounds like. So I think that's what everyone wants. And just to get back to the repetition thing, we've been doing repetition in film since time began. Yeah. Or at least since film began. Just go and listen to any Jerry Goldsmith score, or heck, even any John Williams score. There's repetition all over the place. Alan Silvestri, everyone. Alan Silvestri, exactly. Yeah. And it's like, it is not a bad thing. But you know what they do repeat? They repeat when the idea is good. Yes. And that's what what those composers have a good instinct for. They kind of know when they've kind of struck gold with the melody, and I'm sure they worked with their directors closely when it's like when they found the tune. It's like, is this the tune? But then if you have one, like, reuse it. It's okay. Yeah, I mean, all I can think of now is Back to the Future. We're literally just a bam, 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 and then just that on its own. Yep. Just instantly calls back everything. Exactly. And that's repeated probably like 1 million times throughout the trilogy. So my final question for Ori and the Will of the Wisps is, what was your kind of favourite or proudest moment working on the project? I can give you the quick answer is when it all ended, but no, it's not quite that simple. It is the moment when it comes to life, especially when you spend so long with a project, as I did on this one, and the original. I mean, Ori's been a part of my life for over 8 years.
Yeah, it must be hard to say goodbye to a project after that long.
It is, but also I'm kind of ready to move on to the next thing because it has been a long time.
Of course.
And I think with this project, there was no limitation on budget and scope, so I could really deliver the score that was in my head, and to hear that come to life, and have things turn out better than I expected, and hear an orchestra of at one point we were up to 73 players, and if you include the choir, 97.
Oh wow!
Yes, exactly. For the really big stuff, it's just like a really large group of amazing musicians in a studio which was on my bucket list, Lyndhurst, and and also just working with the soloists, Airly Brighton for vocals, Kelsey Mira for vocals, Kristen Nagus, who played 21 different wind instruments on the soundtrack. Just being able to tie all of that together and deliver it in a soundtrack that ended up being 3 hours long. It was definitely a difficult process just because there was so much work, but I think the further away I get from the project, and the more I will look back on it fondly, because even though it was a very hard project, I'm still like coming out of like how difficult it was. But I think that once time passes, I'll be able to evaluate it in a meaningful way and see that it not only was enjoyable to create the music, but obviously the biggest value is seeing, this is the other proud moment, is seeing it actually affect gamers in real time on Twitch. That's the proud thing I actually want to mention as well is the ending. We nailed the ending. There is absolutely no other way I would end this game. I'm obviously not going to say what it is because there's probably several people who still haven't played it, but it's one of those things I think is perfect, and I think I don't think everyone will react to it in the same way. I also think that's a sign of a good ending, is that it's it has
definitely
a little bit of a debate. It's not a completely cut and dry, but people were affected by it, and that's always cool to see. That is the most rewarding thing, is seeing the work that we've all done as a team did bring people to tears in multiple spots. So that's always cool.
Yeah, it's always great to make people cry, isn't it, Gareth? That's your goal.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, so I have to admit, I would love to chat to you on, forever. But I have one final question.
Yes.
And I usually focus on the future, but something a bit different now.
Okay.
If you could give your past self a piece of advice, what would it be?
It's pretty simple. My advice that I would give to anyone starting out, including myself, is finish the work. And what I mean by that is it means commit to your ideas, and don't just leave them sitting on your hard drive as unfinished, potential idea 576.
Only 576. Ooh.
Well, right, exactly. Getting in the habit of finishing something is a really good habit to get into, because it first of all, it gets you into the mindset of meeting your deadlines, but secondly, you can't evaluate something accurately until you've committed to it and finished it. And I think a lot of artists, when they're starting out, struggle to commit to something, or they come up with the A section, which is the easiest thing to do, the initial idea. How are you going to develop that? Because that's really what makes a piece of music. The A section followed by the B section. Because once you've done the B section, you can return to the A section, and then you've basically got 3 minutes of music already, which is nice. Just getting through and committing beyond that initial idea. And then finishing your work. If you don't finish your work, you can't sell it.
Well, yeah, there is that.
Which is very important when you're starting out, because we're all trying to survive. And a lot of composers, and I actually said this in a forum the other day, I think a lot of composers, when they're starting out, are lazy. They don't realize how much work there is to get a track finished. From start to finish, and that's why it's important to get into that habit, because it is really hard to make that development section in your piece of music, but you've got to fight through it, push through it, do whatever it takes to get something done. And if you can't do it with an orchestra, then maybe don't do it with an orchestra and just do it for piano to begin with. Just literally write an A section for piano, then a B section, and then an A section again. Just get a track finished and then expand on the complexity. Because getting into the habit of finishing is absolutely addictive, and it also helps your clients love you.
And that's what you want at the end of the day, really, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. Yep. A client, I always say, I'll just finish with this. It is much easier and much more attractive for a client or a prospective employer to evaluate something that's finished rather than I'm working on X is not interesting to me because it's not tangible, as opposed to here's what I finished, please listen to it.
Yeah.
That is so attractive. It's the same, I'm working on a game doesn't mean anything until the games come out.
Yeah, pretty much.
You can tell, it could be the greatest game ever, but until it's out, I'm not going to actually know that it's the greatest game ever. But if, here's this great game I worked on, now you can play it, well, I can determine for myself. It's the same with music. So that's what I mean by getting stuff finished, because it means you've created something tangible.
Yeah, and I think we can all relate to that. I mean, especially in the audio world of music and sound design, of where you're like, oh, it's kind of an idea, but it's not done yet. And if you present that to people as, here's a thing, but it's work in progress, it's not done, don't judge it too harshly, then that already sets the precedent of oh, well, I'm not really going to care about what you've just given me then. So,
right,
exactly. You need to just go, here's the thing, it's done.
Yep.
Give me some feedback.
Here's the thing. Yeah, exactly. And then the biggest problem you'll have is either it doesn't work or you have to make a revision. We'll just go write some more music. Is your life really that tough? That's rejection isn't a bad thing. It's scary at the beginning, but in this line of work, you're going to get rejected. It is just one of those things.
Yeah, it's just one of those things that definitely comes with the gig.
Yep.
Okay, well, I have to say, Gareth, it's been an absolute pleasure having you again on the podcast. Thank you so much for coming back.
Likewise, thank you so much.
And we look forward to hopefully having you again in the near future.
Yes, there'll be various projects. Well, it's funny, the projects have been announced, but my involvement in them hasn't been announced.
Oh, man, that's frustrating.
It's coming soon. I think it's largely due to the virus situation.
Of course,
PR schedules have just gone completely out the PR and marketing schedules have gone completely out the window. It's fine. It'll be announced when it's ready.
Excellent. We'll look forward to that then. And stay safe yourself and stay safe everyone else out there as well. Hey everyone, this is Sam. Thanks very much for listening to the Sound Architect podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. If so, there are many ways you can show your support for the show, which is incredibly appreciated. Obviously, there's the financial way where you can support us directly at patreon.com/sounddesignuk. However, there are many other ways that really help as well, such as liking, subscribing, reviewing, commenting, and sharing via whatever channel you're listening on, whether it be Spotify, Podchaser, YouTube, or other platforms. Even a like or a share on social media really, really helps. So thank you so much to everyone who supports the podcast. It really is a work of passion for me, and I love doing it. And, it's really good hearing your feedback and all the good things from everyone that gets to listen to it.